For me, rattling works mildly pressured ground, unpressured ground, mornings and evenings, usually right on the cusp of daylight.
Different things work different ways for different people. For me, this whole tickling stuff, I might as well go home and kiss the sister I don't have, because it is just plain wrong and it accomplishes nothing whatsoever.
November, it's all about road miles. I'm going to Kansas, I'm going to Iowa, going through South Dakota. I've already been to Wyoming and Montana, and then I end up in Nebraska.
Some of the best advice I've ever received on calling deer was from the late great Charlie Alsheimer. And Charlie taught me, number one, to know deer vocalizations. Know what different types of grunts a buck will make. Know what different types of bleats a doe will make. And know when to use these. But the better advice that he gave me is that know when not to call. And that's the type of hunter that I've become, is because I've hunted so much pressured ground over the years that I seldom call, even during the rut. Now, it's not to say that I'll never do it, but knowing when to call and when not to call, for me, is the best advice that I could give anybody. How pressured are those deer that you're hunting?
Calling and rattling are really, really cool and can be effective. They can be. It can be deadly effective, quite honestly. And every year we've got this new super secret, double platinum, extra super serial new deer call that's going to change the world as we know it. So, okay, it's the end of October now. Hunting season either probably opened in the middle of September or October 1st. You're hunting public ground, you're hunting pressured deer. Think those deer have heard any calling and rattling yet that year? Because I can tell you, the last buck that I shot just 2 years ago off of public ground, it was coming the exact opposite way of calling and rattling when I shot it.
I'm not going to call unless it's what I call an audible or desperation. An audible is I see a deer and he's going through the woods. I'm going to call an audible because I don't think he's coming my way. I might throw a grunt at him. I might throw a snort wheeze at him. If I got his temperature and I think he might come. Desperation for me is I see a deer clear across that field and there's no way in the world he's turning around and coming this way unless I give him a reason to. To me, that's desperation. I seldom call blind. I seldom just grunt or rattle during the rut if I'm hunting pressured ground. For me, that scares more deer than I'm ever going to see that day. So I need to know how pressured those deer are on the land that I'm hunting.
You might as well just stand up there in the tree, start going like this and say, "Hey idiots, I'm over here. I'm going to try to kill you."
Coming up, Mark Kaiser is hunting the Great Plains of Nebraska that's filled with mildly pressured whitetails. Up against vast landscapes and fast-moving rutting bucks, Mark puts his calling tactics to the test.
So what about mildly pressured ground or unpressured ground? Different story. Mark shows you here in this episode on how to hunt those deer. Mildly pressured deer or unpressured deer during the rut, it can be wonderful if you know when and when not to call. And more times than not, you can't mess up. I mean, you can call to a deer, he might not be interested, he might not come in, but you didn't scare him away. So don't be afraid in those situations to throw everything you got at him.
This was my last hunt for the fall. I'd just come off a great bow hunt in Kansas, and I was looking for a little bit of relaxation. Just sitting in a blind, sitting in a stand, watching the deer, enjoying the fall weather. The Great Plains winds, they were a-roaring. The temperatures were in the teens. The wind chills were down in the single digits. They may even have dipped below the goose egg mark. But it didn't matter. We had to get out there and look for whitetails. And the whitetails did not disappoint. The winds were picking up, and that kept some of the whitetails a little bit closer to cover. But a few bucks were on the hunt for does. And there were a few does out roaming around as well. That first morning, a beautiful 4x4 whitetail came through, and he stayed in some thick brush, not giving me a shot. That's okay, it was the first morning. I'm still shopping, I just got here. I just loaded up the Hornady ammo. I didn't want to necessarily burn one right away. So I was ready for the afternoon hunt when the temperatures were just a little bit warmer and more enjoyable. Because it was the rut, and you never know when a big buck is going to be between does, I incorporated as much rattling and grunting as I could, especially when I saw a buck kind of flitting through the dark, deep timber or thick cover, and I might want to see if he'll come. At that point, I would employ rattling antlers, or if he's close enough, just some subtle grunting. Now, when do you decide to rattle or grunt? For me, generally it comes down to desperation. If I'm not seeing anything, I'm trying to rattle something up. I also have another code I follow, and that is in the dawn and dusk periods. Right away, if you're not seeing anything, there's no reason not to pull out the rattling antlers every half hour, 45 minutes, and do a little bit of clattering. If you've ever watched deer rutting, you know they can go through a woodlot in Illinois in a matter of minutes, or down the edge of a cornfield in 15 minutes. So every half hour, a new deer could be within hearing range. That's my rule, and I kept to it on this Nebraska hunt. You hear people all the time talk about how great the rut is to hunt. Well, what they may be talking about is the pre-rut, because when the rut occurs, it can be some of the hardest hunting you'll run up against. Now, you're going to see a lot of bucks, but they may not be the buck you want. And what's the buck you want? Well, it's the mature buck. And those older bucks, they have a tendency to just come out, quick grab does, and disappear. Where do they disappear to? Well, they go to hidey holes, spots that aren't visited by a whole lot of other deer. And those can be tough to pick out. And just to sit on one spot when there's maybe 1 million in a square mile of land, well, that's a hard hunt. So you still want to focus on areas where there are a lot of does, where a guy can go meet singles. We're looking for a buck mingling for singles.
Frankly, one of the best tips I could ever possibly give the audience is the first thing I always do when I'm looking at hunting a new area is I question what is the level of pressure these deer endure. Because if it's high pressure, I'm gonna approach it a heck of a lot different than when it's low pressure. Low pressure, man, it is so easy for me to look so darn smart because virtually everything works. When you're talking about high pressure deer, if you're doing the same thing that every other yard ape is doing out there in the woods, you know what? It probably isn't gonna work real well. Now, what I will do on those pressured deer is if I happen to see that buck and he's cruising through at a distance that he is not going to naturally going to come over to me, and I thoroughly believe it is now or never, at that point, I'll actually take out the grunt. Bah. Bah. Get his attention, get him to stop. If that doesn't work, I'm gonna take my teeth, my lower teeth, put it up against my upper lip, and I'm gonna spit all over myself 3 times fast. If that doesn't work, I'm done. I mean, I don't even bring antlers with me to public ground. To be honest with you, I am taking the bare minimum in with me because every single thing I bring in is a potential source of odor. And I'm more worried about that than I am about my success at calling in a heavily pressured whitetail, because I believe my odds are so low when it comes to that. Moderate and low pressure whitetails, that's a different story.
After hunting multiple days without a worthy buck responding to Mark's calling tactics, he's down to the last day, and it's going to require getting out of the stand and making a move on the ground.
Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted movement. Put my binos up, and there was a good buck. Now, it wasn't a monster. I knew it wasn't a giant right away, but it was definitely a worthy buck to shoot if he would just come a little closer and out of the brush. And I could tell after a few minutes of this, that, and that, he was chasing a hot doe. And then everybody disappeared. The buck, he'd went behind a screen of cedars. All the other deer filtered off. And I was sitting there. I think that buck is still there. I think with that hot doe, he didn't go anywhere. But I'm stuck in a blind. I'm thinking that buck I saw, he probably just bedded over there. Looked like about 300 yards, but he's in thick stuff. He may bed there the rest of the day. This is the last day of the hunt, so I think we're gonna take the hunt to him. Try to get as close as we can, and then Rattle or Grunt, probably Grunt first, then we'll Rattle. See if he'll stand up out of his bed and give me a shot. Super thick, I'll have to probably be standing for the shot. He stood up right when I was getting ready to get my rattling antlers out. I was going to rattle, and he gave me a great, it was a frontal shot, slightly quartering, but that's why I shoot a cannon. And set it over here. And this is what you call a Nebraska Cornhusker Special. Nice brow points. He's got an extra kicker right here, a little character. Mainframe 4x4, but this here was damaged, it looks like, during the velvet, and then of course he broke off his G3 right here, snapped it right off. Beautiful buck. We've been hunting hard here in Nebraska. I'm on the last day. I was thinking about trying to stay one more day, but I still might, just getting the meat ready. Nebraska always has a great surprise for me. I love coming here, hunting with the folks from Hornady. They've got a nice property on this big river bottom, sprawling farm. It goes from cornfields to bean fields to timber, and in between are whitetail bucks everywhere. This buck isn't gonna be a Boone and Crockett trophy, but when you hunt hard like we did on this hunt, they're always a trophy. But I love going face to face with whitetails, and that's what we did on this hunt. Improvise. When the deer weren't coming by the stand, we took the stand to the deer. You may think that when you're hunting with a firearm like a muzzleloader, rifle, or handgun, that you don't need to be careful with your scent. Well, there's some truth to that because you got all that distance. You're using a good bullet to hit your whitetail deer from 100 yards or more away. But at the same time, you've got to remember that as you're going into the woods or your hunting area, you're spreading scent. So you need to spray down, and especially pay attention to your feet. You don't want to leave little impressions of yourself all the way to where you're going. And that becomes more important as the rut begins to kick on, particularly because deer could show up just about anywhere. And if you've been to the gas station, Dunkin' Donuts, and got that donut scent on your feet, maybe a little of fuel, and a buck comes in from behind you and you're hoping he's gonna circle around, he may scent you. Even if you've got that firearm, he could disappear before you even see him. So whether I'm going out with my bow or my rifle, I'm spraying down, and I'm particularly paying special attention to my feet.
You know, there's 3 tenets we talk about for deer hunting here at Deer and Deer Hunting, and it's scout, manage, hunt. And what's the first one? Scout. You know, scouting is the most important thing we can do as deer hunters. And that means more than just placing our cuddy backs on food plots and food sources and nice, easy places, you know, bait stations, where you're gonna get pretty pictures. We love that. It's a good way of censusing the deer herd. But the scouting part of it requires finding out why deer do what they do. And that's what I like to do, especially here in the summertime. Get my cuddy links out there. It allows me to scout areas where deer are coming through in the woods, and it also allows me to scout for deer behavior. Let me show you more of what I'm talking about. The nice thing about these new cameras, these cuddy links, is I can set this camera here, set it and forget it. So I can put these in obvious places. Some places where I'm scouting, I'll have cameras up high and I'll have them shooting down on a trail. That allows me, especially in areas with mature bucks, it allows me to get pictures of the deer as they're coming through. I don't really care about, you know, seeing how many points he has on his rack and stuff like that. I just want to know how that deer is using that piece of topography. For me, that's key, because in the fall, this all changes. The leaves are down. Some of these subtle trails are not so easy to scout, especially in big woods environments. So in this particular situation here, I have this cuddy link. It's on an old logging trail here. And I really don't use this area much, but the deer do use it. They not only use this trail, but there's all sorts of other deer trails, especially buck trails, going back into these bedding areas. We have a large patch of woods here that goes for almost a couple miles. Those bucks bed back in there, and they use those little, I call them tertiary trails. They go through the woods, and you can see them, especially in the summertime here, you can see them, they come out on these logging roads, and they just follow them up. Perfect places to get pictures of deer and know how they're using it during the different times of the day. Now let me stop right there for a second. Yeah, that's great in the summertime, you know, seeing deer walk through at 7 in the morning or 5 in the afternoon. Does that help me in fall? Not so much as far as times of the day, but it helps me know which of those preferred trails are going back to those bedding areas, because they will use those same bedding areas throughout the year. Okay, the nice thing about these cuddy link cameras is this one I have right by the trailhead. I can just come swap that card out. All my other cameras are feeding to this camera, which is super nice. And the nice thing is, you don't need cell service for this one, you don't need Wi-Fi. They do have a cellular camera that's coming out, but these cameras right here, I have 4 cameras, up to 16 cameras you can use, all gonna be feeding to that one thing. One card, all my images right there. I can go back to camp and see what we have. Hey, we all love getting photos of deer. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to become a really good deer hunter, put scouting first. Learn more about how the deer use the area, and you're going to be way better off when hunting season rolls around.